Welcome to the TrackPad's Military History Podcast, where we bring the terrain, the tactics, and the stories of soldiers to life. Each episode goes deeper than the written article, giving you a front-row seat to the battles that shaped history. Discover more at trackpads.com.
The story of sea power is often painted with images of great fleets, clashing lines of battleships exchanging thunderous broadsides, aircraft carriers launching strike waves that blot the sky, cruisers and destroyers circling in a deadly ballet. Yet beneath those dramatic spectacles lay a quieter truth that reshaped naval warfare in the 20th century. The deciding factor was not always the ship most visible on the horizon, but the one that lurked unseen below it. Picture a submarine commander at dawn, standing in the cramped red-lit glow of his control room, peering through a periscope as seas heave around him. On the horizon, a convoy inches forward, its escorts cutting purposeful silhouettes against a gray expanse. Above the surface bristle guns, radar, and searchlights promising overwhelming strength. Yet in the silence below, the hunter waits with the ability to shatter confidence, sink supply lines, and deny control of the ocean without ever showing himself. This contrast between what is seen and what is hidden sits at the heart of sea control and denial. For centuries, navies measured their strength in the number of ships they could parade, the size of their guns, or the speed of their battle lines. Submarines upset that balance. They proved that a handful of small vessels, built for stealth rather than display, could strangle a nation's trade or terrify a convoy into hesitation. Fleets could be counted, reviewed, and photographed. Submarines could not. Their presence was guessed at, rumored, and feared more than it was confirmed. For admirals charged with guaranteeing open seas, this posed a profound dilemma. Could they truly claim to control an ocean when just one torpedo, fired from below, could reduce a liner, a tanker, or even a warship to burning wreckage in minutes? The answer played out across decades of conflict, from the North Sea in 1917 to the Mid-Atlantic in 1943, and onward into the Pacific and the Cold War. Submarines became the great equalizers, turning geography itself into a weapon. They did not have to annihilate fleets to win. Instead, they forced adversaries to change behavior, to scatter shipping, to arm merchantmen, to build escorts, to divert planes from other missions. Even the rumor of their presence imposed costs in fuel, morale, and planning. The wolves of the deep proved that denial of the sea could be as powerful a tool as its control, reshaping both strategy and grand strategy without ever engaging in a decisive battle. This episode traces that long contest beneath the waves, how submarines challenged the very notion of maritime dominance, how they compelled innovation in convoy tactics and anti-submarine warfare, and how their shadow influenced events far from the coasts. It is a story of machines and men, of the crushing endurance demanded in steel tubes under pressure, and of the psychological strain inflicted on those who never knew when or where a torpedo might strike. Most of all, it is a story of uncertainty, where silence itself became a weapon, and the oceans of the modern era were forever transformed by predators that remained hidden from view. The logic of sea control and denial has always been framed by the tension between theory and practice, and it was submarines that exposed the gap most clearly. Naval thinkers like Alfred Thayer Mahan envisioned decisive battles fought by great fleets, with victory granting undisputed command of the seas. Julian Corbett, by contrast, argued that controlling maritime communications mattered more than annihilating an enemy's fleet outright. Submarines fit neither mold neatly, yet in practice they altered both. They rarely sought set-piece engagements, but they struck at commerce and supply lines with devastating effect. Their presence blurred the line between strategy and tactics, showing that control of the seas could be denied, even if it could not be decisively seized. By threatening the arteries of empire grain for Britain, oil for Japan, they proved that absence of control could weigh heavier than presence of strength. Geography amplified their impact. Submarines were not equally effective in every expanse of ocean, but they thrived where terrain funneled traffic into choke points. The Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom gap, the Strait of Malacca, the Luzon Strait, and dozens of smaller passages became natural ambush grounds. In these spaces, shipping lanes compressed into predictable routes, and submariners turned geography into a weapon. Beneath the surface, features like continental shelves and shifting thermoclines further shaped combat. Submarines could hug shallow bottoms to hide or dive beneath temperature layers that deflected sonar waves. For hunters and hunted alike, mastery of this invisible terrain was as decisive as firepower or seamanship. The ocean's own physics, once overlooked, became a silent ally to the undersea predator. The war against commerce revealed how fragile industrial societies were once their supply chains were targeted. In an era when national endurance depended on tonnage delivered each month, submarines could cut deeply without ever winning a single fleet battle. Britain's grain imports, Japan's oil lifelines, and Germany's reliance on Scandinavian iron ore all showed how vulnerable modern nations were. Submarines thrived on this vulnerability, sinking tankers and freighters whose loss carried consequences far beyond the sea. Tonnage statistics became measures of strategy. Rationing and shortages ashore testified to victories won in silence beneath the waves. In this way, submarines linked tactical action to strategic effect more directly than any other naval weapon of the 20th century. Yet for every advantage they enjoyed, submarines faced adversaries that adapted with equal urgency. Escort vessels developed active sonar to probe the deep, radar to scan the surface, and weapons, like depth charges, to punish contact. Aircraft extended the reach of detection, shrinking the ocean for the submariner. Each technological leap threatened to close the seas against them, but submarines countered with their own innovations: snorkels to reduce vulnerability while recharging, faster torpedoes, and refined attack patterns. What emerged was an evolutionary struggle where neither side achieved dominance for long. The oceans became an ecosystem of predator and prey, hunter and hunted, where the balance shifted constantly. It was this fluidity, rather than certainty, that defined sea control once submarines entered the equation. When German U-boats first slipped into the shipping lanes of the North Sea and the Atlantic, they were modest craft with crude technology, but their impact far outweighed their size. At the start of the war, commanders tried to follow prize rules, surfacing to warn merchant ships before sinking them. The reality of undersea warfare quickly made such rules impossible. A surfaced submarine was vulnerable to ramming or gunfire, and it could rarely take on passengers from the ships it attacked. Necessity pushed German captains into unrestricted submarine warfare, firing torpedoes without warning and leaving crews adrift. By 1915, this ruthless shift was underway, and the seas surrounding Britain became a deadly battleground, where tonnage, not battleship squadrons, decided endurance. The U-boat transformed the balance of naval power, proving that a small fleet of unseen predators could undermine the might of the world's largest navy. The Allies scrambled for counters, often improvising with whatever tools lay at hand. The Royal Navy deployed decoys called Q-ships merchant vessels armed with hidden guns that lured submarines into surfacing before unleashing surprise fire. Hydrophones were rushed into service to listen for faint engine sounds beneath the waves, and primitive depth charges were rolled off the sterns of destroyers to detonate around suspected contacts. Minefields restricted German access to shipping routes, while merchantmen began sailing in escorted groups rather than alone. These adaptations slowed the devastation but did not halt it. Losses climbed dramatically in 1917, reaching a point where Britain feared starvation. It was not grand fleet actions, but the undersea war of attrition that threatened to end the war in Germany's favor. Life aboard a World War I submarine was a severe test of endurance. Cramped compartments, stank of diesel, unwashed bodies, and stale food. Heat built up when submerged, while fresh air was limited to what little could be drawn in at night. Sailors endured weeks of patrol with constant anxiety, knowing a single mistake in navigation or mechanics could seal their fate. Attacks demanded calm calculation. At periscope depth, a commander tracked his prey while timing bearing and speed with stopwatches, aligning torpedoes for a shot that had to count. When successful, there was barely time to savor the moment before destroyers arrived to retaliate. The thunder of depth charges rolling down through the sea was an ordeal in itself, every explosion testing the strength of rivets and nerves alike. The strategic effects of this campaign rippled far beyond the ocean. Britain introduced rationing and diverted enormous resources to convoy escort. Perhaps most decisively, the United States entered the war after repeated submarine sinkings, including the infamous loss of the Lusitania. The submarine's ability to deny sea control shaped political choices ashore as much as it shaped convoy routes at sea. By threatening Britain's survival, U-boats forced the Allies to coordinate, share intelligence, and adopt convoy tactics that would become the foundation of future anti-submarine warfare. The lesson was stark. Denial of the sea by small, stealthy craft could succeed where fleets of battleships failed. World War I had revealed a weapon that altered the course of nations through silence and patience rather than through decisive battle. When war erupted again in 1939, Germany's U-boat fleet was smaller than its admirals hoped, but its doctrine was sharper than ever. Admiral Karl Donitz envisioned wolfpacks groups of submarines coordinated by radio to hunt convoys in the North Atlantic. Unlike the lone predators of World War I, these wolfpacks were designed to overwhelm escort screens with multiple simultaneous attacks. In the early months, thin Allied defenses and limited air patrols left convoys exposed. U-boats prowled on the surface at night, their low silhouettes nearly invisible, striking from close range before slipping back into darkness. For merchant sailors, each voyage across the Atlantic became a nerve-wracking ordeal, where any calm horizon might suddenly erupt into flames. The Battle of the Atlantic was not a single campaign, but a grinding war of endurance. Measured in ships sunk, convoys delivered, and the morale of men who lived under constant threat. Technology became the defining weapon on both sides. The Germans relied heavily on Enigma-coded radio messages to coordinate wolfpacks, confident in their security. The Allies struck back with high-frequency direction finding, which triangulated radio transmissions, and with breakthroughs at Bletchley Park that began unraveling Enigma itself. New devices like radar, the Lee light, and improved sonar stripped away some of the submarine's invisibility. Yet every Allied gain was met with German countermeasures, snorkels that allowed boats to recharge batteries while submerged, acoustic torpedoes to target escorts, and tactical shifts to evade patrols. The Atlantic became a proving ground for rapid innovation where yesterday's advantage often vanished by tomorrow's patrol. The pace of this technological duel was unlike anything navies had faced before, with survival hanging on the next invention or breakthrough. Geography shaped the battle as surely as technology. The mid-ocean gap, nicknamed the Black Pit, lay beyond the reach of land-based aircraft, creating a deadly stretch where convoys sailed blind against lurking predators. Weather added another layer of chaos. Winter storms scattered formations and massed periscope wakes, giving U-boats cover for attacks. Calm season summer, however, betrayed even the faintest glint of a periscope to alert eyes. Destroyer crews strained to maintain contact in rolling seas, while submariners endured the terrifying ordeal of depth charges cascading through the water. The environment punished both sides, but it also offered fleeting moments of opportunity. In this struggle, nature itself became a combatant. Tactics and doctrine shifted as escorts grew more confident. No longer passive guardians, they began to hunt aggressively. Weapons like the Hedgehog allowed them to attack without breaking sonar contact, while escort carriers brought aircraft to the mid-Atlantic, closing the Black Pit and providing vital cover. The duel between Donitz at BDU headquarters and Britain's Western Approaches Command resembled a grand chess match. Convoy routes were adjusted based on ultra-intelligence, while secrecy about code-breaking forced commanders to act as though their insights came from intuition or luck. This contest of wits was as decisive as any torpedo fired, and leadership on both sides left fingerprints on every success and failure at sea. By 1943, the tide had turned. Allied escort groups became too numerous, air patrols too constant, and U-boat losses mounted faster than replacements. Merchant shipping, though battered, continued to flow. With the Atlantic secured, the Allies could mass men and supplies for Operation Overlord, launching the liberation of Europe. The wolves of the deep had come close to starving Britain and halting the war effort, but the combination of innovation, coordination, and sheer endurance broke their grip. The Battle of the Atlantic proved that while submarines could deny control for years, ultimate victory required sustaining the flow of lifelines across the ocean. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Atlantic was transformed from graveyard to highway of invasion. In the Pacific, the American submarine campaign unfolded as a war of strangulation, one that aimed not at decisive naval battles, but at collapsing Japan's ability to sustain its empire. Yet in the first years after Pearl Harbor, the effort was crippled by failures of its own making. The Mark 14 torpedo, supposedly the cutting edge of naval ordnance, proved a disaster. It ran too deep, failed to detonate, or exploded prematurely. Submarine commanders risked their lives to set up perfect shots, only to watch targets limp away untouched. Frustration boiled over in patrol reports, but Bureau of Ordnance officials denied the faults, insisting the crews were to blame. It took relentless testing, pushed by Admiral Charles Lockwood, to expose the truth and force corrections. Once the flaws were fixed, the silent service became a weapon of extraordinary efficiency, wielding torpedoes that finally matched the courage of the men who fired them. The geography of the Pacific dictated the rhythm of the hunt. Unlike the stormy Atlantic, the clear blue waters around island chains left submarines more visible to patrolling aircraft. Yet deep channels like the Luzon Strait and the South China Sea offered ambush corridors where submariners could lurk in safety. The thermal layers of warm tropical seas created natural shields, bending sonar beams and allowing submarines to vanish in pursuit or retreat. But nature was no gentle ally. Typhoons battered patrols without warning, and coral reefs threatened to tear hulls open if navigators erred. In this immense expanse, the ocean was both battleground and adversary, testing the seamanship and nerve of every crew. Submariners had to master not only tactics but also the unpredictable moods of the sea itself. Japan's empire was particularly vulnerable to this campaign because its survival depended on maritime imports. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, and raw materials from across Asia all had to flow home across long, predictable routes. American submarines exploited this dependency with ruthless focus. They hunted tankers, freighters, and troop transports, knowing that every vessel sunk tightened the noose around Japan's neck. By 1945, the campaign had devastated Japan's merchant marine, leaving its islands isolated and its war machines starved. The battles fought at Midway and Leyte Gulf may dominate memory, but the silent destruction of logistics was every bit as decisive. It was the submarines that ensured Japanese armies could not move, and its factories could not function, even before the bombs fell on Tokyo. Beyond commerce raiding, submarines took on missions that demanded daring and adaptability. They served as lifeguards for downed aviators, surfacing dangerously close to enemy shores to rescue pilots who had ditched at sea. They landed commandos on hostile beaches, delivered supplies to resistance fighters, and even penetrated harbors for audacious strikes. These missions carried risks far beyond the already perilous patrols, yet they revealed the versatility of undersea warfare. The silent service was not merely a force of destruction, but also one of rescue, infiltration, and surprise. Each mission, whether saving a pilot or sinking a tanker, added to the cumulative pressure that broke Japan's strategic endurance. Life aboard was relentless in its demands. Patrols stretched for months from bases in Fremantle, Pearl Harbor, or Brisbane. Heat below decks could reach unbearable levels, food spoiled quickly, and privacy was non-existent. Diesel fumes clung to clothing, and fresh water was rationed so tightly that men went unwashed for weeks. Yet camaraderie thrived in the close quarters of the steel tubes. Each successful patrol carried the satisfaction of striking at the heart of Japan's war effort, while each brush with depth charges tested the crew's collective resolve. The submariners accepted the strain and hardship because they knew their campaign was essential. Though overshadowed in popular memory by carrier battles and island invasions, their silent war was decisive. By cutting the lifelines of Japan's empire, they helped end the conflict in the Pacific on terms the Allies could dictate. Nuclear propulsion revolutionized the nature of submarine warfare in ways almost unimaginable to the crews of World War II. Where earlier boats were constrained by batteries and forced to surface for air, nuclear-powered submarines could remain submerged for months, limited more by food than by fuel. Attack submarines became hunters that could shadow fleets across oceans without ever being detected, while ballistic missile submarines assumed the grim role of deterrence. Each patrol an invisible promise of catastrophic retaliation if nuclear war ever broke out. The balance of global power tilted with these developments. The mere knowledge that submarines armed with intercontinental missiles lurked in the depths reshaped diplomacy, strategy, and the psychology of conflict during the Cold War. Silence beneath the waves became a cornerstone of deterrence. To counter this undersea menace, new detection networks stretched across the world's oceans. SOSUS, the sound surveillance system, deployed vast arrays of hydrophones across key choke points, most famously the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom gap. These listening posts became the front line in tracking Soviet submarines attempting to slip into the Atlantic. In response, Soviet crews learned to exploit natural features, hugging continental shelves, slipping under layers of cold water, or sheltering in noisy shipping lanes. The ocean became a chessboard where one side laid down listening webs and the other searched for quiet corridors. Submarine captains studied the sea as though it were terrain on a battlefield, exploiting every ridge, current, and shadow to remain undetected. Regional conflicts revealed the enduring potency of submarines as instruments of influence. During the Falklands War, in 1982, a British nuclear submarine sank the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano, instantly changing the character of the campaign. Argentina's navy withdrew to port, unwilling to risk further losses, and Britain gained local sea control through a single undersea strike. A decade earlier, in the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War, conventional diesel submarines achieved similar results in confined waters, ambushing surface ships and demonstrating that even in the age of nuclear propulsion, older designs retained lethal relevance. Submarines became tools not just of combat, but of political messaging. Their presence or absence could alter entire campaigns, forcing adversaries to weigh risks they could not fully measure. Technology marched forward, reshaping the character of the contest beneath the waves. Air-independent propulsion gave diesel-electric submarines endurance once unimaginable, while unmanned undersea vehicles began probing minefields, harbors, and even seabed infrastructure. Fiber optic cables, pipelines, and undersea sensors themselves became targets, expanding the definition of maritime warfare. The seabed, once ignored in doctrine, emerged as a new contested frontier, and submarines, whether crewed or autonomous, were the agents best suited to exploit or defend it. Each development widened the scope of what undersea power meant, blurring the line between naval weapon, intelligence tool, and political lever. Detection systems grew increasingly sophisticated as well. Multi-static sonar, in which signals were broadcast from one platform and received by another, transformed the ocean into a mesh of acoustic traps. Maritime patrol aircraft such as the P-8 Poseidon laid down networks of sonobuoys, while satellites and unmanned drones added layers of surveillance once science fiction. The contest shifted from who could build the quietest hull to who could best harness data. Oceans became algorithmic battlefields, where information was as vital as steel and torpedoes. In this new age, the old dynamic endured. The submarine's greatest strength lay in being unseen, and the anti-submarine force's greatest challenge lay in proving it was there at all. The human dimension of undersea warfare is as vital to its history as steel hulls or sonar beams. For the men who sailed in submarines, life was defined by confinement, routine, and the constant presence of danger. Compartments were cramped, air was stale, and privacy was non-existent. Every movement echoed in the narrow hull, every smell lingered, and every mistake could prove fatal. Yet crews forged bonds in this pressure cooker environment, bonds that allowed them to endure weeks beneath the surface. They trusted each other implicitly, because survival demanded it. The submarine was not just a war machine. It was a community forged in hardship, where every man's skill and composure mattered to all. Leadership under such conditions was a trial of character. Submarine commanders bore the crushing responsibility of decisions made in seconds with lives and missions at stake. To surface or stay submerged, to fire or hold torpedoes, to risk a bold approach or break off, all had consequences measured in lives, ships, and strategy. Leaders had to project calm, even under depth-charge barrages that shook rivets loose and buckled steel. Orders had to be crisp, confidence unwavering, because hesitation spread panic faster than any explosion. A submarine under attack was not merely a vessel under stress, but a test of human nerve, and history remembers those who kept composure when chaos pressed hardest. Morale often rested on small rituals and camaraderie. In World War II, American crews decorated patrol logs with cartoons, marked clean plates when torpedoes struck home, and celebrated rescues with toasts from tin mugs. German U-boat crews endured long patrols with music from gramophones or stories shared in bunks, even as supplies dwindled and fear pressed close. In the Cold War, patrols stretched for months, with sailors counting days by letters from home or meals repeated on the galley menu. What kept men going was not comfort, but purpose. The knowledge that their unseen war mattered, that every patrol shaped the larger fight beyond the horizon. For those on the receiving end, the human experience was no less intense. Merchant sailors listened for the distant thud of torpedoes, praying it was not their ship next. Survivors of sinkings recalled the sudden shock of explosions, the chaos of fire and flooding, and the scramble for lifeboats in freezing seas. Many never saw the periscope that doomed them, and the terror of the unseen enemy lingered long after. This asymmetry, submariners enduring claustrophobic strain, sailors above dreading invisible attack, defined the psychological battlefield of undersea war. It was a contest of endurance as much as technology, fought in minds and hearts as surely as in steel and salt water. The invisible burden of submariners was knowing that their success or failure could alter entire campaigns. A single convoy destroyed might force rationing at home, delay an invasion, or shape diplomacy abroad. Crews carried this weight in silence, without headlines or parades, their war largely hidden from the public. For those who served beneath the waves, history's recognition has come slowly, yet their contribution was decisive. The human dimension reminds us that beneath every statistic of tonnage sunk or convoy saved lay the sweat, fear, and resilience of ordinary sailors doing extraordinary things. Submarines have always thrived on turning geography into leverage, and that truth defines their legacy. Where seas narrow into straits, or where shipping must follow predictable lanes, even a handful of boats can force entire fleets to hesitate. They compel escorts to disperse, convoys to crawl, and admirals to calculate risks against shadows they cannot confirm. Submarines remind us that control of the sea is never absolute, only provisional. For every battleship that once symbolized dominance, a single periscope could quietly undo the illusion of mastery. This imbalance between presence and uncertainty remains the submariner's greatest gift to strategy. The uncertainty premium imposed by submarines is their most enduring weapon. Even the rumor of a submarine can freeze shipping routes, delay operations, and consume resources in escort and patrol. Merchant crews sail with a constant edge of fear, while naval planners redirect assets to guard against what may or may not exist. A single submarine can tie down dozens of ships and aircraft, multiplying its influence far beyond its size. Silence, absence, and possibility become strategic levers as powerful as any torpedo. In that sense, submarines win victories not just by what they sink, but by what they force their enemies to imagine. Today's contests beneath the waves are shaped by technologies unimaginable to the early pioneers' autonomous drones, algorithmic sensors, and nearly silent hull designs. Yet the fundamentals remain the same. Success still rests on who hears first, who strikes unseen, and who endures longest under pressure. Whether in the South China Sea, the Arctic, or the Mediterranean, submarines continue to define the limits of sea control. They are the eternal check on certainty, the predators that make every admiral think twice before claiming dominance. The wolves of the deep remain as relevant as ever, even in a digital age. The final reflection is a simple one. Oceans have never been fully controlled, only contested. From the North Sea in 1917 to the GIUK gap in the Cold War and into today's rising tensions, submarines remind us that power on the surface is never secure. They enforce humility on the greatest fleets and patience on the boldest admirals. The wolves of the deep still wait in silence, unseen but never absent, shaping the fate of nations from beneath the waves.
Thank you for joining us on the TrackPad's Military History Podcast. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the battlefield, be sure to explore more articles, episodes, and series at trackpads.com.